My close reading will be on the Canadian graphic novel Skim. It is written by Mariko Tamaki and illustrated by Gillian Tamaki. Skim is a coming-of-age story starring Kimberly Keiko Cameron. Her nickname is Skim. One of the themes of the story is lost love and depression. The first moment that really stood out while examining how this theme comes into play is an instance within the story where a group of students are asked to write down things that make them sad and happy. Kimberly chooses to write down ignorance as something that makes her sad. This idea of ignorance comes into play as a form of critique on how characters in the story understand the ideas of love, depression, and suicide respectively. Kimberly herself is experiencing a romance with her much older drama teacher, Miss Archer, and struggles to understand her own feelings of love along with the feelings of Miss Archer. In this case, we can see how Kimberly's ignorance comes in the form of not understanding love. There is a moment while lying in bed where Kimberly reminisces on Miss Archer. Thinking to herself, Kimberly states the following: things that make me sad, love. Things that make me happy, love. The ignorance that is experienced reflects on Kimberly herself. She continuously struggles with sorting out her own feelings and the lack of those feelings being reciprocated. She loves and pines over the object of her affections, but despite this, the person she loves moves farther out of sight. She is both excited about being in love, but is also in a constant state of pain. She questions why no one else can hear the deafening sounds of her own heartbeat, as love leaves her in a constant state of turmoil. To help us understand Kimberly and her emotional turmoil, the story of Romeo and Juliet is used as subtext to create parallels between the romantic relationships of the characters. The story creates a direct parallel between Kimberly and Miss Archer and Romeo and Juliet. We can better understand Kimberly by comparing the two love stories together. At first, Kimberly dismisses Romeo and Juliet, stating that it's just a love story between a boy and a girl who end up dead. But as the story progresses and Kimberly begins to better understand her own feelings on Miss Archer, she can better relate to the story of Romeo and Juliet by interpreting it as a story of lost love, which is something that she can directly relate to and understand as Miss Archer eventually moves away to Mexico, leaving Kimberly alone and depressed. When asked to describe the story of Romeo and Juliet and her understanding of it later on, her answer directly contradicts that of the one she gives earlier. She explains it would have been more interesting if Romeo and Juliet managed to be together for longer and gotten over their feelings of love. They maybe could have figured things out. If they survived and lived, the relationships could have turned into something else. Kimberly's newfound understanding of Romeo and Juliet comes as a result of her relationship with Miss Archer. The remorse she feels over the unresolved feelings she has due to Miss Archer moving away without her feelings being reciprocated. Her own love was one of tragedy and loss. If she only had more time with Miss Archer, more time to talk with her and to love her, even if her love was unrequited, maybe it could have ended differently, much like Romeo and Juliet. If she could have gotten over her love, maybe the relationship could have continued in some way. If only they had more time together, it could have ended differently. Kimberly, at this point in the story, is no longer ignorant of love, as she has experienced love. Her ignorance of Romeo and Juliet dissipates as she experiences the same form of love, loss, and great tragedy. During the prom scene that occurs during the end of the book, Kimberly gets mad at Julie's assertion that with proper support systems, John wouldn't have killed himself. Kimberly states that it isn't as simple as that no one can know what John went through because he's dead, and Julie isn't a mind reader. Kimberly's own experience with depression and love has allowed her to better empathize with John and Katie. Julie is ignorant of depression and suicide, oversimplifying the problem and the issue, believing that by throwing a prom, Katie's depression will disappear like magic. It is easy for misplaced intention due to ignorance and lack of understanding to become causes themselves. Julie throws parties and holds rallies in order to help Katie, thinking that she is suicidal, assuming she threw herself off the roof in an act of depression and suicide. While reading the story, it is easy to come to the mistaken conclusion that, like Romeo and Juliet, Katie attempted to kill herself due to the death of her boyfriend John. In actuality, Katie didn't throw herself off a roof, she simply slipped on a roof shingle and fell off the roof of her house. Due to a simple act of clumsiness, she is labeled by all of her friends and family as being suicidal when she isn't. Kimberly is mistakenly labeled in a similar way as being suicidal due to her being a part of the gossip culture. Kimberly's experiences have helped her grow beyond shallow and superficial armchair psychology. She allows Katie to tell her story herself and listens to her feelings and emotions. She can better relate to Katie's depression over the death of John thanks to her newfound understanding. Kimberly's strength of character at the end of the story comes from overcoming ignorance through life experience. She grows and matures as she experiences love and overcomes her depression, connecting emotionally with others with her newfound empathy and life experience. Lastly, for my concluding question, in what other ways does ignorance come into effect within the story? How are we as readers culpable in our own ignorance while reading the story? Provide specific examples from the text for both. This is the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening.